Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Mukunda Dutta Prabhu, I think you are there. Hare Krishna Prabhu. Mukunda Dutta Prabhu. Yes, you're on mute.
Hare Krishna, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Jai Shri Prabhupada.
Please accept my respectful obeisances, Prabhu. This guest Mukunda Datta Prabhu is a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, PBT editor, Sanskrit scholar. So almost 40 plus years of Krishna conscious experience. So today we are very fortunate to have him. Thank you so much, Prabhu. You can begin.
Hare Krishna. First of all, let us remember the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada at this auspicious time. It was roughly at this time in 1977 that Srila Prabhupada left the world on November 14th, 1977, just around 7:26 or so in the evening. So by my clock, that was maybe 7-8 minutes ago. So we'll begin with Mangalacharana. Om Ajnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yataparakamam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitam He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kantaratha Kantanamostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaha Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Madhavirapi Gopala Sri Puryat Kripaya Yati Tadaiva Sampaya Pitva Shri Yustat Priyajanaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Namo Gaura Kishoraya Sakshat Vairagya Murthaye Vipralambhara Sambodhe Vadambujayate Namaha. Today is also the anniversary of the disappearance day of Srila Gaurakishore Das Babaji Maharaj, the spiritual master of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who was the spiritual master of our own Srila Prabhupada, founder and Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So, in order of seniority, we can say a few words in his glorification in the beginning, and then we will mainly discuss Srila Prabhupada, the disappearance day of Srila Prabhupada. As we said, Namo Gaurkishoraya Sakshat Vairagya Murtiye. Gaurkishor Das Babaji is called the embodiment of renunciation itself, Sakshat Vairagya Murtiye. He is directly renunciation personified, we can say. It's very well known, the austerities that he performed. There was one wealthy householder couple who owned a house in Mayapur. Some of us own property in Mayapur, or at least we think we own property in Mayapur. And so they thought to purify themselves, they should extend their facility to Gaurkishor Das Babaji Maharaj for him to stay in their house. But Maharaj, Gaurkishor Das Babaji Maharaj, declined to stay in that place. He instead insisted that you allow me, please, to stay in your latrine. And they were, of course, astonished at the request. I don't think there's anyone in ISKCON, I cannot name anyone who would behave in this way in 2021. But that's what he did. And after repeated entreaties, he still refused to stay anywhere except in their latrine. So somehow they had it cleaned up, as best as you can clean up a latrine. And that's where he stayed for some time. It's just unthinkable for most of us, that kind of renunciation. He was so detached. Instead of staying in a comfortable house in the Dham to execute his bhajan, he thought, let me stay in the latrine where nothing will disturb my concentration on the holy name. I would imagine that if you were staying in a latrine, you would really want to focus on the holy name of Krishna. So that's what he did. And that was his regular character. Whenever anyone would come to him for instructions or to try to take shelter of his lotus feet, he would always encourage them to perform this bhajan of Harinam Sankirtanam, just to focus on the holy name. That was his idea of a festival. Instead of wonderful prasadam and very musical kirtan and all the other things that we arrange for our festivals, his idea was just chant the holy name and really focus on the holy name. And in order to do that, he was prepared to stay in a latrine. He felt that if he stayed there, then people would not bother him also, because it's a fact. So many people will come to a saintly person, and not all of them have the best of intentions. Many of them are just trying to get blessings to improve their material lives. So he didn't want to be bothered by such people. So he insisted on this standard of Nam Bhajan. Many other things that we can say about him. He was originally born in Bangladesh, in a village in Bangladesh, and he was married. His name was Vamshidas Adhikari in his household ashram. And unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, his wife expired early. When his wife died at the young age, he decided that he was going to give his life to Krishna. And he took initiation and he went to Vrindavan and he accepted what they call Vairagi Vesh. And in those days, that was the standard for Gaudiya Vaishnava sannyasis. And so he did that. And he lived in Vrindavan for some 30 years, executing very strict bhajan in Vrindavan Dham. By the arrangement of the Supreme Lord, at some point in his life, he was inspired to go to Navadvip, as Bhaktivinoda Thakur has nicely sung. Gauda Brajavane Bhedo na dekhivo Bhaibo Brajvasi. If we see no distinction between Brajatham and Navadvip Dham, then we can become actual Brajvasis. That is the standard to appreciate. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes are going on eternally. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is really no one different than Lord Krishna, Radha Krishna to be precise. So this understanding is extended to the Dham. Tad Dhama Vrindavanam. It's stated that the Lord's eternal pastime, Lila Sthali, is Sri Vrindavan Dham. But the same Radha Krishna, when they appear as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they enjoy their pastimes as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Navadvip Dham. And an advanced devotee doesn't make any distinction between the two. So he came, and he's known for his interactions with devotees in Navadvip Dham. For some reason, it was recorded by that time he had developed a great reputation. He didn't actually write any books, and he didn't do great public preaching programs. He stayed out of the limelight entirely. And only a very few fortunate persons who were themselves advanced enough to appreciate his devotional status could recognize him, but they did. And on the strength of his very, very strict bhajan and his very impeccable character, many people came to him to receive instructions. And those who were fortunate actually were instructed. Many of those who did not pass his test, they found themselves rejected by him in so many ways. So, Sakshat Vairaki Murtiye, Vipralambara Sambodhe. He's like the ocean of the rasa of separation from the Lord. For so many years in his life, he had given his life totally to the worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he was immersed in the taste of separation from the Lord, Vipralamparasa. That we know from Chaitanya Charitamrita and allied scriptures is the zenith of spiritual attainment, to be hankering always for the Lord's association, but feeling his absence. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu expressed this so nicely when he said, Yugayitam nameshena chakshusha pravrishaitam shunyayatam jagat sarvam govinda virahena me. In separation from Govinda, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, I feel like one moment is like a yuga, and tears are flowing incessantly like torrents of rain, and everything in this world seems to be vacant because I cannot find Krishna. This is the attitude with which the best devotees and acharyas in our line have worshipped the Lord. So Gaur Kishore Das Babaji also personified that. And Padambujayate Namah. Therefore, we offer our respectful obeisances into his lotus feet. And on days like today, we beg for his mercy, because it's only by the mercy of such great acharyas that we can advance in devotional service. Sometimes people say Gaur Kishore Das Babaji was a bhajananandi, someone who simply relishes his own worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead without making any great attempt to really spread Krishna consciousness or preach to the public at large. And of course, we know, we've been taught by our Srila Prabhupada that the best worship of the Lord is to become a Goshthianandi, that is to say, someone who is ready to interact with the world at large and very eager to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. So one can ask, why would Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur accept as his spiritual master such a person who was, I want to say, just a bhajananandi? But the fact of the matter is that his bhajan was so intense, and his personal practice of Krishna consciousness so exemplary, that even Bhaktivinoda Thakur actually sent his son, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, to take initiation from this person. He saw that he was the most qualified person at that time in Navadvip Dham. And his preaching, as sparse as it was, or appears to have been, he produced such a great spiritual master in the form of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, that he was indirectly able to foment the preaching of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to our own Srila Prabhupada. In other words, the Krishna consciousness movement owes everything to the preaching of Gaurkishore Das Babaji, even though he wasn't a great preacher in the conventional sense of that term. But his preaching was so powerful that he was able to inspire Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to create the Gaudiya Math Institution and to inspire Srila Prabhupada to preach Krishna consciousness all over the world. So his preaching was indirect in that way. Just as the Lord likes to empower his servants to do all the work, so sometimes the great devotees do likewise. So we can offer our respects to Gaurkishore Das Babaji Maharaj on this day of his disappearance so many years ago. I think 1912, I think it was that he disappeared. He appeared in 1838, if I'm not mistaken, and disappeared in 1912, over 100 years ago. So we have the disappearance day of Srila Prabhupada. Today was the actual day that Srila Prabhupada disappeared by the Western calendar. And I remember that day. From my own experience, I can say that at least among the devotees that I was associated with, at that time I was on the Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtana party, and we were very industriously engaged in distributing Srila Prabhupada's books throughout the United States. And we didn't really believe that Srila Prabhupada would leave this world, actually. That sounds unbelievable from our present perspective, that how could anyone avoid what's written there in black and white in Bhagavad Gita, ki jatasya hi dhruvo mrityur dhruvam janma mritasya cha tasmari pariharyarthe natvam shochitam arhasi. Krishna says that anyone who is born, he's going to die for sure. And anyone who has already died, he will be reborn for sure. So this is the law of nature anywhere and always. But we saw that Srila Prabhupada bent the laws of nature. He rendered them elastic by his incredible faith and determination and devotion to his spiritual master's order. He was factually able to do impossible things, and we saw that. And because we saw Srila Prabhupada do so many other impossible things, we just naturally assumed, in that environment, one naturally assumes that Srila Prabhupada could also do something as impossible and unlikely as transcending death. Moreover, from October into November of 1977, Srila Prabhupada was also talking like this, as if it were his choice whether to come or go. Many times he actually said that Krishna had given him that choice. And we were conscious of this. We were hearing every day, there were new reports coming from Rameswar Swami in Los Angeles. He would get the call from Tamal Krishna Goswami and others in Vrindavan, and he would disseminate that information throughout the United States. In those days, there was no such thing as Facebook, there was no internet, there was no WhatsApp, so we depended on phone calls. But still, the system in ISKCON at that time was just through the phone. This news was immediately disseminated worldwide very quickly. So we were very much up to the minute with regards to Srila Prabhupada's condition. And like I said, we weren't really convinced that Srila Prabhupada was actually going to leave. We thought that he would do another impossible thing and defy death. But it seems that Srila Prabhupada, or maybe Krishna, did want him to go at that time, and so he did. At this time, 7:26, they say. I've heard different things, anything from 7:15, 7:26, even 7:30, it says in Lilamritam, different accounts. But Tamal Krishna Goswami writes from firsthand experience that he left at 7:26 p.m. in Vrindavan on November 14th, 1977. He had been virtually fasting for some time. He had been ill for many years, for many months, actually. Since early 1977, or at least mid-1977, he was ill, and during his last trip to Rishikesh, he became seriously ill. It seems that some storm came, and he decided that it was time to leave. So he came back, and the rest is history, we know. It's always a very sad occasion to discuss this topic. We don't discuss the departure of the Lord. It's not really there in the Srimad Bhagavatam so much. At any rate, devotees don't like to discuss, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's disappearance from this world, even less, is discussed. Anytime the Lord disappears from this world, it's really not a very popular topic to discuss. Somehow or other, someone has seen fit to post videos of Srila Prabhupada's departure all over the internet. Personally, I've never seen that video. I know it's there. I don't really want to see it, but anyway, Srila Prabhupada left at this time. And I think I would like to share a very nice account of this event that was written by Satsvarup Das Goswami in his Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. He's written very nicely. General synopsis of Srila Prabhupada's contribution to the world, his character, his devotion to Krishna, very nicely described. This is page 514 of the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. The final lesson is the name of that chapter. On November 14th, 1977, at 7:30 p.m., in his room at the Krishna Balaram Mandir in Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada gave his final instruction by leaving this mortal world and going back to Godhead. His departure was exemplary because his whole life was exemplary. His departure marked the completion of a lifetime of pure devotional service to Krishna. A few days before the end, Srila Prabhupada had said he was instructing as far as he could, and his secretary had added, "You are the inspiration." Yes, Srila Prabhupada had replied, "That I shall do until the last breathing." Srila Prabhupada's last breathing was glorious, not because of any last-minute mystical demonstration, but because Srila Prabhupada remained in perfect Krishna consciousness. Like grandfather Bhishma Dev, he remained completely collected and noble and grave, teaching until the end. He was preaching that life comes from life, not from matter. And he was showing that one should preach with every breath he has. The many devotees who crowded the large room bore witness to that up to the very end, Srila Prabhupada remained exactly the same. There was nothing suddenly incongruous with what he had previously shown and taught them. At the time of his departure, therefore, he was teaching how to die by always depending on Krishna. Prabhupada's passing away was peaceful. During the evening of November 14th, the Kaviraj asked him, "Is there anything you want?" And Srila Prabhupada replied faintly, "Kuch ichha nahi." I have no desire. His passing away was in the perfect situation in Vrindavan with devotees. A few months previously, a young girl, the daughter of one of Prabhupada's disciples, had passed away in Vrindavan. And when Srila Prabhupada had been asked if she went back to Godhead to personally associate with Krishna, he had said, yes, anyone who leaves his body in Vrindavan is liberated. So this is just a brief example of, it very nicely illustrates Srila Prabhupada's character. Just a few days, maybe within 5 days of Prabhupada's leaving this world, some prominent members of a Gita Pratishtan had come to visit Srila Prabhupada, and they insisted on speaking privately with Srila Prabhupada. And Bhakti Charu Swami, he had the presence of mind to leave the tape recorder running while he stepped out of the room at their request. So the conversation was recorded. And they had asked, they were pressing Srila Prabhupada that who is going to take care of all these assets of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness after your departure? Who's going to be the next Acharya? They were in effect asking. And Srila Prabhupada was very clearly and repeatedly stressing, as he always did, that this is open to everyone. He said, if you like, you can become, but you have to follow. And Srila Prabhupada knew very well that they weren't prepared to do that part. They wanted to somehow manipulate whatever information they could glean from Srila Prabhupada before his departure. But Srila Prabhupada wasn't having any of that. Just like Srila Prabhupada didn't really reveal anything esoteric about his own Siddha Sarup, his own eternal constitutional position, even though he was often asked by his disciples, he wouldn't really be tricked into answering that question. He would just say something like, you don't require this just now, or it will be revealed when the time is right. So similarly, Srila Prabhupada simply said, these all my disciples, they will all inherit. They will all become the next Acharya if they follow. He who lives, what is that? He who follows he lives forever by his instruction, and he who follows that instruction also lives forever with him. This is something that Tamal Krishna Goswami said very nicely in his own diary when he was also concluding his description of Srila Prabhupada's departure. He said, excuse me.
Can't hear.
Yes. He said very nicely, Tamal Krishna Goswami wrote in his diary, which also explains these events of Srila Prabhupada's disappearance very nicely. From his first-hand account, he was primary actor at that time, orchestrating everything and managing everything at Prabhupada's request as his secretary. He said that Srila Prabhupada lives with those who live to fulfill his desires. I'll read it again. Srila Prabhupada lives with those who live to fulfill his desires. This simple sentence really sums up what Srila Prabhupada's entire life was about. His entire life was nothing but the example of someone who lives to fulfill the desires of his spiritual master. So Srila Prabhupada's disappearance was extraordinary, not in that he displayed any great mystical revelations, as Satsvarup Maharaj has already described, or that he revealed any esoteric knowledge about his eternal constitutional position, but the very simplicity and the consistency with his entire previous life is really striking for someone who is conscious enough about Krishna consciousness to really recognize what Srila Prabhupada was doing. I was reviewing some of these days earlier today, and I was struck that when someone suggested that they invite some scientific devotees like Sarup Damodar to come, Srila Prabhupada was immediately launched into this whole preaching about the importance of preaching to the atheistic scientists, that life comes from matter. That life comes from life and not from matter, that the soul is eternal. Common sense, logical preaching, the kind of very basic preaching that Srila Prabhupada spent his whole life repeating to us. He's on his deathbed saying the same things. He's discussing management issues about Mumbai Temple with Giriraj Swami just a few days before he left this world. Really, it was only the last day on November 14th itself that Srila Prabhupada went into an internal mode of consciousness and ceased his external activities. Even then, he remained in full Krishna consciousness, and as it's been described by so many at this time, when he left the world, Srila Prabhupada finally opened his eyes, he opened his mouth, he said Hare Krishna, and he left this world and went back to Godhead. So, such a great lesson we have from Srila Prabhupada in the simplicity of his devotion to Krishna, devotion to Krishna in the form of devotion to the spiritual master and his mission. Srila Prabhupada had that mandate, and he recognized that mandate. He was given that mandate at his first meeting with his own spiritual master back in 1922. The very first moment that his spiritual master spoke to him, he gave him his life's mission to preach Krishna consciousness to the English-speaking peoples. And Srila Prabhupada dedicated his whole life to that, all the way up until the end. In Vrindavan here, when we're studying the Srimad Bhagavatam every morning class, we have been reading from chapter 13 of the 10th canto. What is the significance of chapter 13 of the 10th canto, which narrates the stealing of the cows by Lord Brahma? That is the last section of the Srimad Bhagavatam that Srila Prabhupada personally translated and commented on. And we have the videos of that also. We see that even lying down in an amazing physical state, Srila Prabhupada's consciousness was still as clear as ever. And he was dictating his Bhaktivedanta purports on the same topics that he always dictated in his purports. The same, nothing new. Nothing new. Everything was the same. And we can see, if we carefully study those purports, we can appreciate just how transcendental Srila Prabhupada's consciousness was at that time. His Kaviraj had said that an ordinary man should be screaming in pain. Srila Prabhupada really didn't have any flesh and not much blood either. He was mainly bone and skin covering that bone. Very, very, very thin. Everyone knows. Maybe you've seen the pictures. You know, all the way from the London days, when Prabhupada's last trip to London, the devotees were shocked to see him because his hands were swollen with edema, and he was wearing sunglasses. He was so gaunt and very weak also. Many devotees had just immediately upon seeing Srila Prabhupada in 1977, they just started crying because they could understand that it's different now. The body is changing. And the implication was very clear that Srila Prabhupada would not be with us very long. Many times throughout that year, Srila Prabhupada had said that he wanted to leave. But it was ultimately up to Krishna, and ultimately Srila Prabhupada gave this decision to his disciples. There was a lot of back and forth amongst the disciples, very heated arguments also, about whether to take Srila Prabhupada on parikrama to Govardhan. He wanted to visit all the tirthas. And in particular, he wanted to go and visit Govardhan Hill. And many devotees were opposed. Most devotees were opposed because the Kaviraj was adamant that if he goes on parikrama, I'm leaving today. And not even Lord Brahma or Lord Shiva or Lord Vishnu will be able to keep me here. Kaviraj actually said like that. He was very much opposed to it. And so naturally, most of the disciples were also very opposed to it. A few of them were in favor because it's what Prabhupada wanted. How do you reconcile an argument like that? It's very difficult, very, very difficult. But somehow or other they were discussing like this, and the discussion created such anxiety amongst the devotees that they were practically on the verge of nervous breakdown. And Srila Prabhupada knew all this. Srila Prabhupada always knew everything about us. Anything, Prabhupada knew everything. Just like your mother knows everything. You can't hide anything. Once Shrutakirti said, he was Prabhupada's servant for so many months. Every single day, he was outside Prabhupada's room 24 hours a day. And Srila Prabhupada told him, your only business is to sit here and respond if I need anything. That is your only service. But you have to perform it unfailingly. So every single day, Shrutakirti experienced that Srila Prabhupada never called him in the early morning because Prabhupada was always busy translating in the early morning. And Shrutakirti was very much missing the opportunity to go and see the deities at Mangalarti and to dance in the kirtan with his godbrothers. So one day, Shrutakirti thought, so many days I'm here sitting, Prabhupada's never going to call me. Let me just, this one time I will go to Mangalarti. And he did that. And then after a few moments when he was blissfully dancing in the kirtan, someone came and tapped him on the shoulder and said, Prabhupada is calling for you. Prabhupada knew. So Prabhupada was also aware of the devotees' feelings in this last few days, even despite his own completely physically compromised position. He was aware of everything going on around him. And he was deliberately trying to intensify their emotions by making these outrageous suggestions like we can go in a bullock cart to all the holy tirthas. He said, anyway, if I die, that's, this is natural, but it's glorious to die while preaching. He was saying like this. So all the devotees were completely anxious about this. And, they were fighting amongst one another, and they were just, on the verge of nervous breakdown. And finally, Krishnadas Babaji, Akinchana Krishnadas Babaji, Srila Prabhupada's godbrother, whom Srila Prabhupada said was actually a Paramahamsa, very advanced person. He was always chanting the holy names. Very rarely he said anything other than chanting. But on this occasion, he spoke up and he said, he also opposed it. He said, you can't go. And when he did that, the other devotees were encouraged in their opposition. And so they also tried to importune that Srila Prabhupada, please don't go. And so Srila Prabhupada simply yawned and he said, okay, just like that. The most nonchalant life or death decision ever made, Satsvarup Goswami later described. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj told Srila Prabhupada that we were in such anxiety, Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, yes, that is my duty. He said that when you suggest these things, it just throws us into so much anxiety, and we're constantly worried about how to take care of you, and like this. And Prabhupada simply said that this is his duty. So even though he was physically incapacitated, he was always trying to intensify the devotion of his disciples. And in this case, he did so by suggesting that they go on Govardhan Parikrama. He even had Lokanath Swami prepare the bullock carts to do so. And Lokanath Maharaj is a faithful disciple, he did so. And Prabhupada wanted to go out and travel. He said that if I go out and travel at this time and drink milk from the cows and just eat simple grains that we beg, then my health will recover in the Indian sun. Prabhupada said like this. So these things were going on in Srila Prabhupada's final days. I think I would like to read a little bit from Tamal Krishna Goswami's diary, TKG diary, which also probably is the best description of these days. And I'll just skip ahead to the final days. November 13th. well, let me back up. On November 12th, they were still discussing this bullock cart idea. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj suggested that can Sarup Damodar also come, because in case we meet some intelligent people, then he can preach to them. And Prabhupada said, oh yes. At this point, Giriraj Swami piped up and said, but you'll need someone to enlist members also in case we meet any rich people. And everyone laughed at that. Tamal Krishna Maharaj noted that Giriraj is requesting to come. Is that all right? And Prabhupada said, yes, you can come. Actually, in the end days, Prabhupada wanted all of his disciples to come. Not all of them did come. And not all of them were allowed to come. I mean, I can speak from my own experience. Our authorities on the Radha Damodar Traveling Sankirtan Party, they were preaching to us that, you know, the service and separation is higher than the Vapu Seva, and in particular, the book distribution is Srila Prabhupada's heart. If anything gives Srila Prabhupada strength and encouragement, it is to hear the book scores, this number of books distributed. And that is a fact. It really was a fact that nothing would make Srila Prabhupada perk up like hearing the book distribution or the preaching results. So this is another one of those Achinta Bheda Bheda things that which side is right, which side is wrong, it's hard to say. But Prabhupada was personally requesting that all of his disciples should come, because after all, we would not have the opportunity to get that Vapu Sangha anymore. And Prabhupada knew that. He was planning to leave. He knew. So Lokanath Maharaj asked Srila Prabhupada, can I also come? And Prabhupada said, you will be the leader. So Srila Prabhupada agreed to this, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, but one thing we request you is that you get a little stronger. When going, we should not turn back. And Prabhupada agreed to that. So the next day, Srila Prabhupada had severe pains in his legs, and they were trying to apply heat to his legs without so much help. But the Kaviraj, Srila Prabhupada's Ayurvedic doctor, was also coming very frequently at that time and doing what they could to help Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada's godbrothers came, Krishnadas Babaji Maharaj and also Bon Maharaj. And Srila Prabhupada had Tamal Krishna Maharaj show them a diploma that they won for the BBT at the Moscow Book Fair. And he showed them various photographs of the deities and temples all around the world. And Bon Maharaj was praising Srila Prabhupada's books, and actually he said that it was wonderful that Srila Prabhupada was in such perfect consciousness. So Prabhupada also spoke with Bhagatji for some time. Now, on the 14th, the attacks of pain in his leg, left leg, they were coming regularly, about every 3 hours. Srila Prabhupada was in deep consciousness at that time, not external consciousness. And the Kaviraj was coming frequently, but Prabhupada was only taking medicine with the great efforts on behalf of Bhakti Charu Swami. Srila Prabhupada moved his right arm back and forth very gracefully in the air, but nobody could properly understand what did he mean by that, because he wasn't speaking. Although we all wanted to help him, this is Tamal Krishna Maharaj writing, that we felt we could not. The Kaviraj confirmed that Prabhupada's condition was very serious. No entry was made in the medical journal because Prabhupada had not passed any urine. Although there must have been urine in his body, we could all understand that the end was approaching. The room was packed with devotees and the chanting was continuous. The Kaviraj suggested inserting a catheter to empty his bladder. The GBC members present at that time, Hansadutta Maharaj, Sarup Damodar, Jagadish, Bhavananda, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj deliberated and decided that they would not do that. Because even if they did that, it would only extend his life for a short period. And Prabhupada had many times stated that he did not want to leave his body with tubes in his body. like his god brother Tirtha Maharaj and left his body like that. So everyone could sense that Prabhupada wanted to return back to Godhead, back home, and they had tried all medical things and everything failed. And so they informed the Kaviraj of their decision to let Srila Prabhupada depart. He agreed, and he understood because he was himself a devotee. Everyone was surrounding Srila Prabhupada's bed. Upendra, Sarup Damodar, Shadadanya Maharaj, Bhavananda Maharaj, Hansadutta Maharaj, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj with others, both men and women. Pishima, Srila Prabhupada's sister, we called her Pishima auntie. She came in and asked Prabhupada, have you eaten something? Srila Prabhupada didn't respond, even though she asked again and again. She placed Ganges water in Prabhupada's mouth. We had placed Tulsi leaves and Yamuna water by Prabhupada's head. Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers arrived, and they set up benches on each side of the bed for them to sit. Bhavan Maharaj, Krishnadas, Babaji Anand Prabhu, and god-nephew, Narayan Maharaj. They sat and watched intently, observing Srila Prabhupada's consciousness. Narayan Maharaj spoke in Srila Prabhupada's ear, but there was no response. But when Bhakti Chadu Swami spoke into Prabhupada's ear, telling him that Narayan Maharaj and others were present, Srila Prabhupada slowly raised his left hand to his head in salutation and started crying. Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers explained that Prabhupada's attacks were simply the moving of airs in the body, not actual pain. They said Prabhupada was in perfect consciousness and they did not feel the time had yet come for his departure. So after 2 or 3 hours, they left, promising to come immediately whenever we called. The Kaviraj, however, said that Prabhupada had only 2 or 3 hours left. Already we had informed ISKCON around the world. Pujaris brought Tulsi flower garlands from Krishna Balaram and placed them on the pillow around Prabhupada's head. Actually, we do this every year in Vrindavan, the same thing, ever since 1977. Srila Prabhupada's bed is nicely decorated and his photo is there and the garlands are placed there exactly as they were when he departed. And his head was facing in the direction of the deities also, just as it was in 1977. So understanding that the end was near, everyone chanted and prayed and there was nothing else to do. When the last attack came at 3 p.m., Prabhupada rubbed his hand quickly back and forth across his heart. Upendra also massaged his heart while I sat, this is Tamal Krishna Goswami speaking, holding his lotus feet. For 4 hours, Srila Prabhupada was very peaceful. Then at 7:25 p.m., Prabhupada opened his eyes, which were very clear, more so than in many months. His mouth opened, his tongue moved, and then he became still. The Kaviraj took Prabhupada's pulse and held a cotton swab to his nostril, detecting no movement of air. Our beloved Srila Prabhupada had departed. Surrounded by his loving disciples who were chanting the holy name of Krishna, lying very peaceful in his bed in Vrindavan Dham, the holy land of Krishna's birth, his head directed toward the deities of Krishna Balaram, surrounded by photos of all the deities and his Guru Maharaj, decorated with chandan and a big tulsi leaf on his forehead, holding tulsi in his right hand, Srila Prabhupada departed and returned to the lotus feet of Krishna from whence he came. Oh, how the world has become devoid of its crest jewel, Srila Prabhupada. How everything is now vacant. The room filled with wailing and crying. Devotees clutched Prabhupada's lotus feet, and Pisima approached, crying piteously. We asked most of the devotees to leave while the chanting continued around the bed. Bon Maharaj returned and advised that we take Srila Prabhupada's body on Parikrama of Vrindavan to the 7 major temples. Anand Prabhu had been there all the time. Narayan Maharaj then arrived. We sat Srila Prabhupada up and crossed his legs, afraid that his body would stiffen. Bhavananda closed his jaw, which had remained open, and we tied it closed with a cloth around his head. We placed Prabhupada in a palanquin and carried him into the temple with the blowing of conch shells and beating of mridangas and kartals. First taking him before each deity and then circumambulating the temple 3 times, we brought him again before the altar of his lords, Krishna and Balaram. We circumambulated his transcendental body 4 times with kirtan after placing his whole palanquin on the Vyasasana. Led by Narayan Maharaj, Krishnadas Babaji, and Anand Prabhu, we performed kirtan and prayers throughout the whole night. Srila Prabhupada's expression was sublime, just as when he had previously sat on the Vyasasana. His eyes were closed and there was a slight smile on his face, and we all expected and prayed that at any moment he would lift his hand and return to us. The day was Gaur Chaturthi Tithi, the 4th day of the light half of the month of Kartik. Time was 7:25 p.m., 5 minutes after the most auspicious time of that day. Amrita Yoga began. The residents of Vrindavan awaited the last darshan of the great Acharya of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas who has spread Vrindavan's glories to the darkest regions of the world. At 6:30 a.m., the Goswamis of the 7 temples arrived to escort the divine form of Srila Prabhupada to their respective deities. Prabhupada had his hat and chadar on, and he sat in his palanquin. He would not circumambulate lying down. Like a strong lion, he sat up, and when the residents of Vrindavan saw him, they were amazed. He was covered with flowers offered the previous night by his disciples. Taking him into the courtyard to the accompaniment of kirtan led by Narayan Maharaj, we circumambulated his body 4 times and began our procession with grand kirtan. The Brajavasis, happy to see his perfection, chanted Jai Prabhupada. Everyone knew him as Vrindavan's most famous son, and they loved him. As we approached each temple, the head pujari came out. The kirtan rose to a crescendo with Narayan Maharaj chanting, Jai Madan Mohan Jiva, Jai Radha Damodara Jiva, Jai Radha Ramana Jiva, glorifying the particular deity and Prabhupada, who represented them so well. Then Narayan Maharaj chanted, Jai Prabhupada. We were all merged in an ocean of grief and yet proud to be disciples of our Guru Maharaj. Then parikrama lasted 3 hours, ending when we arrived at Krishna Balaram Mandir at 9:30 a.m. We brought Srila Prabhupada's divine body to the Samadhi site. Upendra and Bhavananda undressed Srila Prabhupada, leaving only his kopian, and placed him on banana leaves. First Narayan Maharaj, then Krishnadas Babaji, and then Ananda Prabhu poured Yamuna water over Prabhupada's transcendental body. I took the conch shell next, this is Tamal Krishna Goswami speaking, and allowing all the devotees to touch it, poured water over his body many times. We dressed him in new silks and a new sacred thread. Narayan Maharaj took a tulsi manjari and with chandan wrote the Samadhi mantra on Srila Prabhupada's chest. Narayan Maharaj, Anand Prabhu, Bhakti Charu Swami, and Tamal Krishna Goswami descended 7 to 9 feet into the Samadhi pit, at the bottom of which was a pure white marble slab. We performed pujas, Anand Prabhu chanting the mantras while guiding the movements of my hands. This is Tamal Krishna Goswami speaking. Bhavananda Maharaj and Upendra lifted Prabhupada's transcendental form, and I received Prabhupada's body for the last time. We placed him in a sitting position and offered arati. All the devotees who were standing about, chanting and blowing on conch shells, threw thousands of flowers upon Srila Prabhupada. As Prabhupada had previously instructed me, I saved a few to be taken to Mayapur for another samadhi. We poured salt 9 inches deep around Prabhupada's body, and then filled the rest of the samadhi with dirt. We marked where his head was. After reaching the ground level, we built up an area about 3 foot square, marking the place where his body was seated. We covered the area with fresh cow dung and placed fresh saffron silk on top. For shade, we've suspended from 4 bamboo poles and other saffron cloth. We placed 2 tulsi plants on each side, and on the grazed ground, a photo of our beloved Guru Maharaj. Pradyumna offered prasad and full arati, and we circumambulated 4 times. In complete surrender, we took shelter of Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschati Deshatarane. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. He then goes on to describe how on Gopashtami they took Srila Prabhupada to Govardhan, a small brass deity, that's Utsav Murti of Srila Prabhupada to Govardhan, because they wanted to fulfill his desire to perform Govardhan Parikrama, his last desire. So then they returned and recounting the glorious days and activities of Srila Prabhupada. In the early days, Satsarup Maharaj and Achyutananda Maharaj both spoke for some time, and at 5:30 p.m. they all sat down and had a transcendental feast, eating to their full satisfaction. Then he writes, it had been a wonderful outing because Prabhupada had been present. Srila Prabhupada lives with those who live to fulfill his desires. We take shelter beneath the lotus feet of our beloved Guru Maharaj, whom we eternally serve. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. I'm going to stop there, but if anybody has anything to add or any questions or any comments, we can continue as you wish.
Thank you so much, Mukunda Prabhu, for wonderfully narrating, describing the last moments of the Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Srila Prabhupada's glorious departure. If we can elaborate, just thinking as a teeny fallen soul, how we can come to that consciousness as we leave this body while preaching. So what we can do to come to that state of consciousness.
One Braj poet has written very eloquently, Jabalagatana man tapana vyapai, tabalaga kari hari seva. While we have this opportunity, we should delve into Srila Prabhupada's books, because if we really want to know Srila Prabhupada, and really want to appreciate Srila Prabhupada and understand Srila Prabhupada and ultimately serve Srila Prabhupada, we have to assimilate his books. And now we have that opportunity. I think now more than ever, because the external distractions in many places in the world have been minimized due to pandemic concerns. So we're indoors, or we should be. And so it provides us with a wonderful opportunity while we can to really assimilate and make, well, as Narottam Das Thakur himself writes best, Guru Mukha Padma Bhakko Chitete Koya Aikya Arana Kari Homani Asha. To really just bring those words into our hearts and make them the same thing as what we spontaneously desire within our hearts. That's what we have to do while we can. Srila Prabhupada took such labor to write his books only for this purpose, only for you and I. The future generations, Prabhupada knew that we will all come and go. We're all here like fireflies for a short time, buzzing around. And eventually we burn out and we leave this world. But if there's anything that we can accomplish of significance while we're here, it is to render service to the pure devotees, especially to the Prabhupada. So he gave us that example to follow. And in particular, he considered it that the books are the basis of his entire mission. He used to say, books are the basis, preaching is the essence, utility is the principle, purity is the force. So everything comes from the books. There's no utility without the discretion given by the books. There's no purity without following what the books say. There's no essence in the form of preaching the Sankirtan movement apart from what Srila Prabhupada's books have taught us. So this is the one thing that I recall all the way back to the mid-70s that Srila Prabhupada criticized about his disciples, that they do not read his books enough. In 2021, it seems that people don't read any books, what to speak of Srila Prabhupada's books. We read Facebook, we read social media, we read our phones. But, and I mean, Prabhupada's books are also there. Someone has had the presence of mind to put them there. But the fact of the matter is that we really have to take advantage of what Prabhupada intended for us to do while we can, because you will lose this opportunity. It is definite. You will lose this opportunity. And you don't know when. It may be tonight, it may be next year, it may be after 40 years. But we have the opportunity now. And if something is auspicious, it should be done immediately. So that's what I'm going to say. I say that because, well, it's a fact that Prabhupada really, really wanted people to appreciate him on the basis of his books. Any preaching program he would do, he would insist that the books have to be present, prominently displayed and sold. Kirtan, pravachan, prasadam, but the books have to be there as well. It's something that we have somehow allowed that consciousness to dwindle or to lessen over many years since 1970, mid-1970s. Exactly how that happened, I don't know, but it should be reformed. Back in 2014, I think it was, somebody did a survey of the leaders of ISKCON to see who's read Srila Prabhupada's books and how much. And it was discovered thereby that only 25% of the movement's leaders had even read all of Srila Prabhupada's books. That is not acceptable to Srila Prabhupada. As I said already, he criticized that himself, about his disciples. You think my books are only for selling. He used to say that quite a bit, actually. But actually, the best book distributors are the ones who read the books very carefully. We were talking about Bhajananandis versus Goshtianandis. So it is sometimes said that the best Goshtianandi is a Bhajananandi, and the best Bhajananandi is a Goshtianandi. But you have to involve the Srimad Bhagavatam in this process. Otherwise, it is not possible to make spiritual advancement in this age. Krishne svabant sadamo bhagate dharma jnanadhisaha kalau nashtadrashanesha puranar kodhanoditaha. This Bhagavatam has arisen like the sun in the darkness of Kali Yuga, just to bring us all back to Godhead. So Srila Prabhupada gave his life. He worked so hard while the world slept. He was pouring his heart into writing the Bhaktivedanta purports, not just to have them sit on the shelf shrink wrapped, but that we would actually open them up and assimilate them fully. Jegorangir madhur lila jarikarne praveshilo antar hrido nirmod bhilata. That's the idea. It should go in the ear, it should go into the heart, and it should stay there. And then it will come out. What goes in must come out. This is the point. And there's nothing very nice that emanates from this material body other than Krishna Katha. But that's not possible if we don't hear every day. So the most often lectured upon verse of the Bhagavad Gita was 7.1. Yathagyasasi tachrinu. If you're really serious about understanding God, just hear. You have to hear. So that's my advice. I hope that's appreciable.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
I was
Anyone
attracted
else
to
has questions?
on the basis of Prabhupada's books. I've been maintained on the basis of Prabhupada's books, mainly over so many years, decades. Therefore, I'm saying this. Okay.
Adhupati Prabhu, Devkinanda Prabhu, you want to say anything? We will conclude.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you so much for sharing, taking us actually to the last day of Srila Prabhupada's last time through the readings. Wonderful. I also wanted to ask you, Srila Prabhupada decided to go to Vrindavan to fold his pastimes, and you mentioned, Srila Prabhupada also mentioned that devotees who leave their bodies in Vrindavan, they go back to Godhead. How do we, the followers of His Divine Grace, especially who are getting older, how do we take that instructions and apply in our lives? Please share your wisdom with us. Thank you so much.
Well, that's a very general question. And, we're all individuals. We all have a unique approach to Krishna consciousness, even though we all follow the same process, for sure. But we all follow it in ways that are unique to ourselves. So it's kind of hard to answer such a general question. I can say for myself, I've moved to Vrindavan. That's my decision. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also says very nicely that Mamastu Vrindavana eva vasa. He said that where people naturally have love of Godhead, where Srimati Radharani has been coronated as the queen of this place, the queen of bhakti, and where my ardent desire lies, that Vrindavan only I want to have as my eternal residence. So that's how I take it. And actually, Srila Prabhupada was not really planning to come to Vrindavan. His plan was to go to the West. And what did he want to do in the West? He wanted to go to Gitanagari. He said, I'm going to sit down there for as long as it takes, and I'm going to teach you practically how to live this simple living, high thinking, varnashram lifestyle. That was Prabhupada's heart. At one point, he also called it the remaining 50% of his mission, which was a very strong statement if you think about it, given that it was made at the end of his manifest pastimes in this world. So that was Prabhupada's plan, but the Lord has his own plan. And Srila Prabhupada, of course, was submissive. He only got as far as London. You all know the story. So then he came back to Vrindavan because it was obvious that it was time to go. So Mayapur or Vrindavan, these are the places that the Gaudiya Vaishnavas hold more dear than anything. Of course, you can practice Krishna consciousness anywhere, and you should. And better than that, you should preach Krishna consciousness everywhere. But ultimately, our home is Vrindavan. As Prabhupada said, his home is Vrindavan, his bhajan sthali is Mayapur, and his office is Mumbai. That's what I have to say tonight about that topic. I hope that's okay.
Thank you so much.
But certainly we should be aware of encroaching death. Why else is the system arranged such that our hairs gradually turn gray and our teeth rot and fall out and we can't do the things that we used to do? We're supposed to get the hint. There's no other reason for old age but to show us that, look, you don't have forever. That's why I said, read now, today, and every day thereafter, because it's not granted. A friend of mine in Los Angeles was coming home from work. He was maybe 50 something. And he just had a massive heart attack on the freeway and died on the spot. No chance. Once the big door slams shut, you cannot make any more choices. That opportunity is only available now. So do it now. This is the determination we need. Okay. Hare Krishna.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Madhubal Prabhu, anything to add or say something? Busy. Okay, Prabhu, we'll conclude today's session. Looks like no other questions.
Prabhuji, I have one question, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Go ahead. Ajay Prabhu and Taruni Radha. Go
Ajay
ahead.
has a question. Taruni Radha has a question. Their hands are raised.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Ajay Prabhu.
Yeah, Prabhuji, Hare Krishna. Prabhuji, I have read like Prabhupada mentioned, Srila Prabhupada mentioned that whatever he Prabhupada is writing the books, those are not his words. Those are from Krishna. But like I have heard like many times, many people told like Srila Prabhupada books words have been changed, and many people left ISKCON because of that thing. So. So that's like it's bothering me, Prabhuji. Like why it was done, and normally books we are distributing to bring more people to Krishna consciousness, Srila Prabhupada. But if people are leaving because of editing the books or changing the words of Srila Prabhupada, their Guru Maharaj, many people got offended, and I know many people left ISKCON. That's what I came to know. It's a little bothering to me. Yeah, Prabhupada, if you can answer, tell anything about that. Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah, of course it's a controversy. I don't really have a great inclination to enter into that controversy, but the fact of the matter is that Prabhupada instructed some people to edit the books when he was present. And of course, Prabhupada also instructed those same persons not to change a single word. So it's a tough call. What Jayadvaita Swami told me personally is that at some point the process of editing Prabhupada's books must stop. So that is the question for, I guess, the BBT trustees to wrestle with. I can't really condone a process of perpetual editing, because I was trained in textual criticism and manuscript studies. And, as soon as you change anything, you no longer have an autographed copy of your text. That is a problem when we're talking about the principle of Guru Parampara. So I have a conservative position about this. At the same time, it's a fact that Prabhupada did designate at least one or two people to clean up small errors, grammatical errors, not to change the content, and especially not to change the content for socio-political reasons. That's another matter. So, yeah, it's something that might help the GBC deals with it, but at least the BBT trustees have to deal with it, because, as you may know, the BBT and ISKCON are separately incorporated. I hope that's okay for now.
Yeah. Thank you, Maharaj.
I can't really explain what other people are doing. This is maybe the better way to answer the question. Only they can explain what they're doing. So you ask them.
Sure, Maharaj.
Okay.
message.
I think she needs to unmute herself because I'm not hearing anything.
Yeah, you're on mute, Mataji. You can speak. Oh, no, I can't hear.
That's the question Mataji, you're asking about last week.
Hey, Prabhu, give me an instruction because I can't hear anything, so I'm not sure what to do. It seems like Pranani Radha Mataji is muted, so.
Mataji's question is, what should we do to qualify to serve Gautam Shila?
Ah, okay. Well, yeah, a simple question. I can speak from personal experience about this. Maybe back in 1990 something, Tamal Krishna Goswami asked me if I had a Giriraj Govardhan Shila because I was worshiping a Shalagram Shila. I told him no, and he said, you should worship Giriraj Shila. So I took that instruction, but I made no attempt to really do anything about it. But some years later, when I was at Govardhan Hill, I was living there at Govardhan Hill for some time, serving under Gopi Pranadhana Prabhu. And I had gone to Vrindavan all day. I was busy running errands, and I came back to my room, and the lock to my door was broken, and the door was ajar. So I assumed that my computer had been stolen, and the passport gone, and money, etc., etc. So when I went inside the room and turned on the light at the end of a long, hard day, I found that there was a table in the middle of my room with a saffron silk cloth on top of it. And sitting in the middle of that table was a Giriraj Govardhan Shila. I have no idea how it got there. And when I asked people there, they were in charge of the ashram, they were all mum about it as well. So I don't know. But I would say that when your spiritual master gives you an instruction to do something, you have to do it. How it transpires, that's going to be relative to each and every one of us, I think. So if you have been given the instruction to worship the Giriraj Govardhan Shila, then you have to consult with one of the leading pujaris in our movement, someone like Mukunda Dutta in Vrindavan, the other Mukunda Dutta, or Jananevas in Mayapur. They know these things. It's not really very different than Shalagram Shila worship, but of course it has to be Yatha Vidhi, means it has to be by the book. You can't just invent a concoction standard. Srila Prabhupada in 1977 was very worried about what would happen to the standards of ISKCON deity worship after he left the world. And to some degree, there have been concoctions, I have to say. So that bothered Srila Prabhupada. So one such concoction is that you cannot go to Govardhan Hill and pick out a Govardhan Shila and bring it home and worship it. Some people do that, but it is totally unauthorized. Actually, the tradition here in Braj is that anyone who wants to remove Giriraj Govardhan Shila has to replace it with an equal amount and equal weight of gold. Are you prepared to do that? Or at least you have to be given the Shila by one of the Brajavasis. So there are standards to be upheld. This is the point. It's not the free for all. It's very serious responsibility, and it has to be carried out for the rest of eternity. What does that mean? Even when you die, you have to make arrangements that someone will carry on the seva. Once deity worship begins, it cannot be stopped at any point. And it's very serious because worshiping of the Shilas is the same as worshiping deity. Shalagram Shila, Giriraj Govardhan Shila, Dwaraka Shila, they're all non-different from the Lord. And many people commit offenses, I'm sorry to say. Many people commit offenses. And an offense to Giriraj Govardhan is very powerful offense. It's something to be taken very seriously. We all have to think soberly about this and work very closely under the guidance of proper authorities, especially our bona fide spiritual master. It's a general question, so I'm giving a general answer. I hope it's satisfactory. But bookmark the part about performing puja yatha vidhi, vidhivat puja, according to the vidhis. There is a standard, there is a conventional tradition that has to be respected, upheld, and followed. That sets an example for everyone else as well. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prabhu. I think Satish Pandita, Prabhu, you had a question, but you now lowered the hand. If you still have a question, go ahead, and with that we'll conclude.
Yeah, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. I had one question about your, because you did mention Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. Just wanted to get some additional kind of your interaction with the Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj during that time.
Yeah. That can also be controversial. Maybe not so much now because his followers are dwindling, but the first time I met him was way back, maybe in the 1990s. And I just happened to be visiting the Keshavji Gaudiya Math because that's where Srila Prabhupada accepted sannyas. And while I was there, someone invited me upstairs to see Narayan Maharaj, who happened to be resident at the time. So you don't want to refuse. I accepted that invitation. Just went to pay my respects. When I saw him, he and his secretary, another brahmachari, were in the room. And he was giving private darshan to a couple of, looked to be maybe teenage girls. And they were discussing various aspects of bhakti rasa, raganuga bhakti, which kind of struck me because in ISKCON we're used to Srila Prabhupada's didactic style in which he didn't really do that and didn't really encourage it or even approve of it. So, but I didn't say anything and I didn't really think anything too much of it, but it did strike me. So we went and we left a small donation and we left. That's the first association I had with him. I had his association twice. On the second occasion, I was visiting a friend who was hosting another godbrother who had left ISKCON. So there were two guests in this god sister's house. And one of them had left ISKCON and joined his camp, the Narayan Maharaj people. So under the pressure of repeated invitations from my host, I was kind of obliged socially to go to a program in which Maharaj was speaking. So I listened to the lecture. And it was basic Krishna consciousness philosophy, but every once in a while there was a little barb thrown in as well. Like he would say something like, maybe your Guru Maharaj didn't teach you these things. That kind of thing. Tamal Krishna Goswami later told me that the reason he stopped going to see Narayan Maharaj is because of this sort of statement, that every once in a while something just comes that is not right. At least hurts our hearts, those of us who are disciples and followers of Srila Prabhupada. Okay, so this is this is him. And I came and I sat through the lecture, and when it was time to go again, they invited me to come and see Maharaj. At that time, I was a scholar, so maybe they were thinking, you know, I was an important guest or something. I don't know. But so then there was a private discussion in his room upstairs, and he was kind of continuing along the same thing, same vein, talking about, he told me that Prabhupada instructed him to guide his disciples after his physical departure. That is to say, to guide Srila Prabhupada's disciples after his physical departure. And he was also discussing so many things, details that, you know, seemed to me to be like subtle criticism of the way that we do things or don't do things in ISKCON. For example, saying Achman, the correct way to say Achman. These are things actually, if you have been socialized in ISKCON since its inception, you know that these are always the kinds of criticisms that come out of Gaudiya Math. Small sort of external things that Prabhupada didn't really seem to regard too much. At least didn't give too much importance to them. Okay, so that's also, this is his position, and he can have that position, that's fine with me. But then, at one point in this conversation, I overheard him because I was sitting about 3 feet away. He leaned over to his secretary and whispered in his secretary's ear that, "You watch," he said, "one day I will take every last person out of ISKCON." I heard this with my own ears. And I'm not going to criticize it. And I think I don't need to criticize it. At some point, Narayan Maharaj was in fact offended by ISKCON. It's true. He could have been dealt with in a better way. But he seems to have gone on a vendetta against ISKCON in some ways. And this was around 2000 something. So maybe he was in that mood. I don't know. I'm not going to try and judge it. You asked me for my experience, my ideas about Narayan Maharaj, I'm sharing them. And that's the only thing that I really have to say, because that's the only association I've ever had with him. But it is clear to me from whatever teachings of his that I've heard, that there's a really strong emphasis on Raganuga Bhakti that does not exist in any other Gaudiya Math, and was not also very much encouraged by Srila Prabhupada in the same way. It's a clear distinction. Some other things we can say, but there's I think no need. I hope that's okay. I don't really want to say too much about this.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you, Prabhu. That clears the details you gave in both the things, I think. So that is the essence we can understand from it. Thank you so much. All glories to His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.
Ki jai. Jai.
Thank you very much, Mukunda Dutta Prabhu.